Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and with the iPhone 16e now released, there's a lot of buzz about what Apple might have in store for us coming this fall with the iPhone 17 line. So today I thought we'd take some time and go over everything to expect. The rumors as of now, it said we're going to see the biggest upgrade since the iPhone 10, and that's a pretty high expectation to live up to, but we've seen so little change in the past few years that I'd say we're about overdue for a dramatic shakeup. We're kind of in a strange spot right now. Apple's cheapest iPhone is $600, and while the 16e seems to be a great device for sure, not having any budget option anymore is pretty rough. But let's start with what to expect this fall, specifically September 2025. Obviously, keep in mind these are all rumors. We don't really know what's going to happen. But what I've compiled here is, I think, the most likely rumors. Generally, I would say we have a pretty good idea of what these iPhones are going to look like before they actually come out pretty much every year. It's quite rare for Apple to actually surprise us anymore. Only way to really find out is to wait till September, right? But there's no harm in talking about what to expect. Starting this off, let's look at Apple's typical release pattern just for some perspective. In 2024, we got the iPhone 16 and 16 Plus as sort of these upper mid-range options, then the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max as Apple's high-end models. This is the typical pattern we've seen for years now. This year, it seems Apple is finally shaking things up, and we're going to be seeing 3 tiers of iPhones rather than the typical 2, with the expected iPhone 17, 17 Pro, and 17 Pro Max, but also this all-new iPhone 17 Air. We'll briefly first start with that lowest tier, the iPhone 17, which, like the iPhone 16, will be the least expensive new phone, rocking a ProMotion display. That's right, a non-Pro iPhone is finally going to be getting 120 Hz, and it's about darn time. The design will probably look very similar to the 16, at least according to current rumors. It's the other models that will probably end up looking significantly different. The size could either be 6.1 inches or 6.3 inches. 6.1 is the size of the 16 right now, 6.3 is the size of the 16 Pro. Tough to say which for sure. I would assume 6.3 inches personally, but we don't really know at this point. Either way, there's going to be no Plus option this year. The Plus model iPhones have never sold particularly well to begin with, so this isn't particularly surprising to me. And it's also unfortunately rumored that this phone very well could start at $900 rather than $800, which does suck, but would be very unsurprising. It is possible this doesn't happen. Apple was expected to raise prices on the iPhone 16 lineup, and they didn't, so who knows, maybe they surprise us again. But personally, I kind of think prices are going up this year. It seems more likely than not. This phone should again have a dual camera setup. We're going to have the same 48 megapixel wide lens and 12 megapixel ultra wide, but on the front, across all these new iPhones, we're going to see a new 24 megapixel selfie camera, apparently. Internally, we can expect the A19 chipset and the typical improvements you would expect to come with that, and we'll likely still have 8 gigabytes of RAM. It also sounds like we could get Apple's own new custom Wi-Fi 7 chip, but not the C1 modem that we see in the 16e. That's apparently not going to be in this phone, nor the iPhone 17 Pro or 17 Pro Max. There's a reason for that, and we'll get to it in a bit. It's also said the ceramic shield display is going to be upgraded and should be more scratch resistant, so cool. Phone cooling and heat dissipation is supposed to be more efficient, and naturally there's probably going to be another half dozen of minor little changes like we see most years. There's always little things here and there, just minor year-to-year sort of upgrades. All around, a fairly boring upgrade to be honest, and for $100 more than the iPhone 16 it doesn't sound great, but it does have ProMotion, which is admittedly really nice to see, and I mean it should have been on the iPhone 16, but whatever, at least it'll be on the 17. But let's go ahead and move to the more exciting iPhones, because I think that's why we're really here. In the second tier, we will have the iPhone 17 Air, supposedly. Right now, it's rumored to be an in-between device from the iPhone 17 and the 17 Pro. Sort of like with the iPad line, you have the iPad, iPad Air, then iPad Pro, and it's expected this phone should slot in the same way. You'll have iPhone, iPhone Air, or iPhone Pro. We don't know if it's actually going to be called the Air, but I do think it makes sense for Apple's naming scheme. There were rumors saying this could be an iPhone Ultra model and be the top tier, but these have seemingly died down recently, and right now it's looking more likely this will be sort of that in-between device. This phone is going to be significantly thinner than previous iPhones, hence the name Air, and it'll sort of replace the Plus iPhone outright, having a 6.6-inch display which is slightly smaller than the 16 Plus. The biggest quirk of this phone is going to be that form factor, and it's going to be very thin, which may come with some downsides. As you can see from the concept I'm showing here, there's apparently only going to be the single 48 megapixel wide lens on the back, just like the 16e, probably because it would be very difficult to fit any anything more than that onto a phone this thin. We've also got this elongated camera bar sort of setup in current renders, which is interesting and sort of reminiscent of like Google Pixel phones, although knowing Apple, they'll have their own unique spin one way or another. The actual thickness of this phone has been debated, and no one really seems to know quite where it's going to end up. Probably somewhere between 5mm and a bit over 6mm. You look at the crazy thin iPad Pro, that's 5.1mm, which is insane. iPhones have a lot they need to cram in though, with a lot less space than would be in a very big iPad, so I wouldn't expect it to be that thin. A recent dummy model was 5.44mm, so who knows? For some perspective, the non-Pro iPhone 16 is 7.8mm thick, and the thinnest iPhone ever made back in 2014 was the iPhone 6 at 6.9mm, which was really thin, by the way, and it's crazy Apple's gonna be outdoing that. That phone was so thin that there were major durability issues, actually, and that entire Bandgate catastrophe that happened, I'm pretty sure Apple this time around will be very careful to avoid that sort of situation again. Hopefully, probably. Battery life is something I'd be a little worried about. You would expect it to suffer if it has to be significantly reduced to fit in this thing, and it very well might, but it is rumored we'll be seeing a new high-density battery that ideally won't completely suck. It's going to be a big task to have reasonable battery life in a phone this slim. There's a reason iPhones over the years since that iPhone 6 have generally only gotten thicker, as they just need the space, especially for things like bigger batteries. So I'm very curious how Apple handles that. For the rest of what we get, it's going to be very similar to the iPhone 17. ProMotion, A19 chip, 8GB of RAM, and we will be getting the C1 modem that's in the iPhone 16e. This apparently is only going to be in the iPhone 17 Air. The rest of the phones will be sticking to Qualcomm, likely to retain mmWave 5G compatibility, something the C1 does not have, although it's really not a big deal in my opinion. mmWave 5G is the fastest version of 5G, but it's the kind of 5G that relies on having towers basically everywhere, so unless you live in specific areas that actually have it, you won't be able to take advantage anyways, and 5G as it is already plenty fast. The C1 in the Air does make a lot of sense since it's far more power efficient and will probably help out that smaller battery. Overall, the iPhone 17 Air is definitely the phone I'm most excited to see here. It's something new, and it sounds like it'll finally be a real shakeup from the iPhone formula, a device that maybe will actually be a bit different from the competition for once. It'll be also interesting to see how it compares to the Samsung Galaxy S25 Edge, which is sort of similar. That phone I believe is 5.84mm thick. I'd expect Apple to beat that, although when you include the camera bump on there, it could end up quite a bit thicker, who knows. I guess we'll have to just wait and find out to see for sure. Price-wise, I have no idea what the heck this thing is going to cost, to be honest. Rumors are all over the place for that. All the rumors said $12.99, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense if this is going to be in between the iPhone 17 and the iPhone 17 Pro, because that implies the 17 Pro is going to be really expensive, and it just doesn't add up, really. Maybe this phone costs more than the 17 Pro, but less than the 17 Pro Max. I could see that happening, although hopefully not. I'd really prefer this to be between the 17 and 17 Pro. I feel like that makes more sense. I think the cost will probably be anywhere from $1,000 to $1,300. Wherever it does end up though, it's going to be probably pretty expensive. And now we finally come to Apple's highest tier in the iPhone 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max. Again, pricing here could be anywhere, so we'll come back to that in a bit. These phones will not be ultra slim like the 17 Air, but they should at least look a bit different from the current 16 Pro line, with this large rounded rectangular camera bump and a familiar triple lens setup. I personally think it makes more sense for Apple to keep their cameras oriented like this, rather than spreading them out across the back like I've seen in some renders, since it does give them a bit of an identity compared to something like a Pixel. I also believe you need those cameras oriented vertically in order to record spatial video for Apple's Vision Pro headsets, so I don't see this sort of design actually happening. It could, but I think it's unlikely. I'd wager they stick to this sort of setup for their camera lenses like we're used to, just with the whole camera bump across the back for whatever reason. And I would take all these renders with a grain of salt. I don't really know how I feel about this look in general, but I mean, let's be real, Apple is like the king of designing hardware, so whatever it ends up looking like, I'm sure it will look good. Interestingly, titanium might be done away with completely here, with Apple moving to an aluminum frame with the iPhone 17 Pro, as well as for the back, a part aluminum, part glass backing. Aluminum apparently on the top half and glass on the bottom half, which will allow for wireless charging and MagSafe. I will say it is kind of sad almost that we're moving away from these more premium materials. We've had them in Pro iPhones for a long time. The stainless steel frame on the iPhone 10 made it stand out from everything else at the time. And while I wasn't the biggest fan of the move to titanium, it at least does lend to this luxury feel of these phones. But even so, aluminum has been used in smartphones for years for good reason. It's strong strong and it's lightweight, and I do trust Apple will make a pretty slick looking phone regardless of the materials used. For the cameras on the back, I would expect the 48 megapixel wide lens, 48 megapixel ultra wide lens, just like we had on the 16 Pros, and then possibly a 48 megapixel telephoto 5x zoom lens. Though that last one may be limited to the 6.9 inch 17 Pro Max apparently, with the 6.3 inch 17 Pro getting the same 12 megapixel telephoto lens that we currently have. Kinda sucks, but not the end of the world. That Pro Max is going to be probably very expensive, so it kinda makes sense it would have some sort of benefit over the smaller model. For the nitty-gritty tech specs, we can expect the A19 Pro chipset in both of these phones, compared to the standard A19 in the 17 and the 17 Air. The Pros are also expected to get 12 gigabytes of RAM. Hopefully that won't be limited to the Max, although it could be, it's hard to say. Personally, I think it would probably come to both. All in all, seemingly solid upgrades, but nothing that exciting compared to the iPhone 17 Air. Yeah, the design's different, but it's also just, it doesn't feel that different to me for some reason. I know it is, but the iPhone 17 Air getting super thin is at least something really different, you know? And I will say, none of this really amounts to the level of hype that the iPhone 10 produced, at least for me, which makes sense. I mean, that phone did away with the home button and everything crazy, right? But considering how far smartphones have come and how great they are these days, what else can you expect? There's really only so much you can do with these slabs of glass and aluminum or titanium in some cases until you just don't have that much left to improve. At least we'll be seeing something that should feel pretty new in the iPhone 17 Air. And so before we wrap this up, let's take a look at the iPhone lineup as a whole as it should appear at the end of 2025. At $600, we'll have the iPhone 16e, of course, and there's a good chance we see a 17e early 2025. We likely still have the iPhone 16 and 16 Plus sticking around at a price reduction, so we'd be looking at $700 for the iPhone 16 and $800 for the 16 Plus. At either $800 or $900, we'll have the iPhone 17, which will look very similar to the 16 with some upgraded internals and, of course, ProMotion, which I think alone makes it probably a much better deal than the 16 ever has been. Then there's the iPhone 17 Air with its ultra slim form factor and only a single camera lens, yes, but some cool stuff to make up for it. Price is questionable, we'll get to it. Then the iPhone 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max rounding out Apple's 2025 to 2026 iPhone lineup. So yeah, pricing is the real big question here. I think we've probably got a good idea of how these phones will look, as well as most of the big new features, but how much are they going to cost? Well, I mean, the ideal scenario is that Apple doesn't raise prices in spite of everything, including all the current tariff stuff going on. I think this is very unlikely, but it's technically possible. So, you know, again, the iPhone 16 lineup was heavily rumored to raise prices and they didn't. But that was, in my opinion, probably because Apple knew it would be a bad look when those were such minor upgrades. This year, with a far bigger upgrade, really, it's a better excuse to raise prices. But again, it's possible they don't, and in that case, we would have the $800 iPhone 17, maybe $900 iPhone 17 Air, $1,000 iPhone 17 Pro, and then $1,200 iPhone 17 Pro Max. Again, those prices staying there, I think, is highly improbable. If I had to predict how Apple will price these, I think the iPhone 17 at $900 sounds about right. But what comes next? I think the iPhone 17 Air will be cheaper than the Pro models. If it is actually an in-between device, which it sounds like it will be, with only one camera lens, that makes sense. It could still end up being some sort of ultra version, in which case I can't see there only being one camera, but who knows. If it is called the Air, even if it's not, I think Apple's probably going to try to stick to the same sort of lineup as their iPads. So maybe I'm being too hopeful, but I would really like to see the iPhone 17 Air at $1,000, $100 more than the iPhone 17. I think what really makes sense for this is Apple could market the phone at $999, which looks much better than anything over $1,000, especially considering this will be the most talked about iPhone and possibly the best selling. Who knows? That's what I'd like to see it at. I think it's probably, there's a good chance it's going to cost more, anywhere from that $1,000 to $1,300. Let's say it is only $1,000 though. In this case, the 17 Pro could then cost $1,100 and the 17 Pro Max $1,300. While this price increase still does sting, the 17 Air being at $999 really helps things look a little bit better. But it's so hard to discern what Apple might do with this sort of thing. We are overdue for a price increase since it was supposed to happen with the iPhone 16 line. I thought it was going to happen with the 15 line and it didn't. didn't, so I think we're overdue and I would expect it to happen this year. Hopefully it's not too much. That iPhone 17 Air at $999, I think it just fits. We'll see if it's even called the Air. It might not be. I don't know what else they'd call it though, so I think it makes sense to call it the Air. I guess we'll see. But I think with that, I'm actually right about done here. This iPhone lineup sounds intriguing and much more exciting than the current one in the very least, even if it is more expensive. But I would love to hear all of your thoughts in the comments. Would you be interested in buying one of these iPhone 17 models? Which one? Is the iPhone 17 Air going to live up to the hype you think? Make sure you leave your opinions down below. If you found this video interesting or helpful, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more tech content. We do have a Discord server if you enjoy talking tech and want to talk to some like-minded techies. We've got a great community over there. And huge shout out to the channel members. Thank you guys so much for your support, and thank you all for watching. I don't normally do a lot of rumors videos, but the iPhone 17 line, it is pretty interesting, and there's been a lot of new rumors coming out recently, so I thought it was worth a look. But yeah, I'm done. So I'm Josh from Tech, and I'll see you all next time.